All right, well, welcome to part 3 of our Wealth Optimizer series. Today we're going to be looking at cash flow, principal reduction, as part of this ongoing discussion we're going to have surrounding rental property and how we analyze it. So let me take you through it. A couple of things that we want to do for this class is, of course, we're looking at real estate fundamentals, but the purpose is essentially to learn how to invest in real estate. Real estate is an awesome investment tool for our own purposes. I learned this early on. We're slowly starting to get and ramp up our own real estate portfolio. So this is some of the stuff I'm going to teach you is how do you do it for yourself, right? Make money at real estate for you. The second thing is, as I go through this, I've already taught these classes. This particular one I think I've taught maybe, I'm going to say 5 different times, sometimes to communities, sometimes to real estate groups as a part of the 3-hour continuing ed class. But as I go through, I'll make mention of how I'm doing this so that you can kind of not only learn about real estate, but learn about how you can present these classes to someone in the community. The third thing is to build our clients' wealth. I can't think of something that's more rewarding than to be part of building somebody else's wealth. And can we do that multiple times? And the Wealth Optimizer is one of the tools that can help us really get after that and do that. And then the fourth one is we want to build our business. If we can master, like we talked before, the Wealth Optimizer process, we can help clients build wealth, and they're going to come to us because we have the property management tools to manage these things we call rental properties. And then finally, of course, as always, we're trying to build a money machine. And I think there's really 2 money machines here. One, of course, is the rental property itself, right? It's got a tenant in place and it kicks out rent, and we have expenses, and hopefully we end up with money that comes out the bottom. But of course, the property management company is the second money machine. And I think that Wealth Optimizer does one really well, and it's a really complementary tool to help us build our portfolio of managed properties in addition to owning our own rental properties. So 2 money machines for us, 1 money machine for our clients. Okay, so as I go through this, we look at the 4 benefits of owning real estate. And during a class, I'll actually pull these up one at a time, and before I give them to people, I'll ask them because I want people to be engaged, get them to think about it. So what are the 4 benefits? So let's go through them. Well, the first one's cash flow. That's the one that most people think about when they think about rental property. It's the money that goes into your checking account once all expenses are paid, the bank's paid, the government's paid. There's your cash flow. You can buy groceries with it, you can go on vacation with it, whatever you want, that's cash flow. The second thing is principal reduction. And people that, many of us own our own homes, and we're familiar with this one as equity. So we know that when we make a mortgage payment, the equity in our home increases. We pay a portion of that payment in interest. But long term, we're reducing the principal on the loan, right? The loan balance is going down, and we own more of that home each month that we're in it. The third one is appreciation, and appreciation has to do with the property going up in value, which we got a whole class dedicated to that coming up. But that's where we buy it for $100,000 and sell it for $150,000, and it appreciates in value. The fourth one is depreciation with a D. Depreciation is just another way for saying the property wears out over time, even though we keep it up and property goes up in value. So it's kind of this weird thing where it's going up in value, but we're saying it's going down in value. When we talk to the IRS, we tell the IRS we lost money on it. So that's kind of an interesting process. But depreciation is the tax benefits that we can get off of owning rental property. The next one is kind of fun. So while I'm teaching a class, I'll pull this one up and say, hey, what are the 2 benefits of owning stocks? And people will puzzle about that for a minute. And then it'll come out, oh yeah, it's appreciation, right? It's the value of a stock when you buy it for $1, and hopefully it goes up to 10. Or, like has happened, right? We're recording this in October of 2018, and the stock market has just fallen off a cliff and wiped out all the gains pretty much for 2018. So appreciation, of course, you hope it goes up. But anyway, that's when you make money in the stock market. You buy it at $1, you sell it at 10. The second way you make money is with cash flow if the stock has dividends. So certain stocks, blue chip stocks, oftentimes more established businesses, they kick out quarterly earnings, and they'll give all their shareholders some portion of the revenue that they earned over the preceding quarter. And you can either buy groceries with that again or reinvest it if you so desire. But it's your money, you can use it as you wish. So those are really the 2 benefits of owning stocks. What's interesting is that stocks don't really have any tax write-offs. You can't, any kind of gains you're going to get taxed on, but you don't get any sort of depreciation on a stock. And then finally, there's really no bank loans to speak of when you want to invest in stocks. Maybe you can do something with margin, right? They allow you to maybe buy a little bit more than what you actually have cash for because you can cover it with if you had to sell off additional stocks. There's maybe some leverage products where they'll move 3 times what the actual underlying issue is. But by and large, you can't borrow money for stocks. It's just too volatile, it's just too risky. So ultimately, all stocks usually have 1 benefit, some have 2, but real estate has 4. And this is why real estate is extremely interesting. So what I want to look at is this whole question of to borrow or not to borrow. When do I talk to investors, and when I think about it for myself, it's like, okay, do I want a paid off property, or do I want a property that the bank owns a large portion of it? And the answer is yes. Or to say there really is no right answer. It all depends on where you are, where you're at in life, what your goals are, what your risk tolerance is. All these things come into play. But what I want people to understand, both you as franchisees, but also our clients, is what is the power of leverage? What can it do for us? And where are those risk factors? So just to give you an example of how leverage or borrowing works in a rental property, I'm going to give you this hypothetical property. And right even before I start, you notice this purchase price is $118,000. Those of you watching this in California are like, what kind of shack are you peddling to us, right? $118,000, that's a doghouse. And you guys in rural Missouri are like, hey, that's pretty nice. I don't even live in a nice house like that. So understand, the numbers don't matter. It comes down to the process of what we're trying to achieve. You can use this on a single family home in Arkansas, or you can use this on Trump Tower. Ultimately, it's going to be the same thing. That's the cool thing about this. The numbers will be different. Add a few zeros, as our dear Kirk McGarry used to say, add some zeros. But at the end of the day, this process will work for large and small properties alike. All right, so let's break it down. Purchase price is $118,000 in our ideal property here. The net operating income is $8,000. So net operating income, the abbreviation is NOI. That's an extremely important ratio, and it essentially just means total income minus total expenses gives you your net operating income. It doesn't take into account your financing. So we don't have to pay the bank. It doesn't care if you paid cash or if you financed the property. At the end of the day, it just is income minus expenses. That's your net, NOI. So in this case, our net operating income was $8,000. Now, our return on investment with 20% down, our ROI with 20% down, I did all the math for us, is 17.75%. When we go to 100% down, so we pay 100% cash for this property, our return on investment drops to 6.9%. Well, with financing, this property performs 2.5 times better than if I paid cash for it. Well, that's interesting, right? Which one do I want? Well, I don't know, right? Depends what my goals are again. But generally speaking, I have to go the bigger return, depending upon what the risk is. Obviously, if the risk outweighs those rewards, we want to be careful. Let's look at it a different way. A lot of times investors will think they want to have paid off properties. Well, I get it, right? There's less risk. You just have to worry about cash flow. You don't have to lay up at night worrying about a vacant property. It's much easier. But they also are losing returns. So let's look at another hypothetical for a second. If we take that same $118,000, if we could pay cash for this property, should we? Well, let's take our $118,000 and buy that property for cash, 100% cash. In the first year, we're going to get about $8,100 in cash the first year. If, however, we instead take that same $118,000 and put 20% down, so we can essentially buy 5 of these same properties. So if you just kind of think about this, if we put 20% down, we could buy 118, 118, 118, 5 times. At the end of that, you're going to have $590,000 in property. So we could put the 118 down 1 time, buy $590,000 in property, and let's look at our return. In that case, we're going to get only $5,600 in cash versus the $8,000 in cash we got. But we're going to get some principal reduction. We'll get a lot of principal reduction. $15,000 in equity in our first year, which means we have a total of about $21,000 in our first year in returns. So if you look at the difference here, cash, $8,100. If we leverage, $21,000. Same cash, same money in, right? This is all the money I have, $118,000, and yet my returns are 2.5 times greater with a leveraged purchase versus a cash purchase. So that's the power of using other people's money. Now, the flip side, right? Whenever something sounds too good to be true, that probably is, or there's something we want to look at. And I don't want us to be thinking about being one of these sleazy, cheesy, slick snake oil salesman that goes out and talks about how great this thing is that we're selling, when in fact it's going to hurt someone, right? We want to give them the flip side. We want to talk about the risk. We want to talk about the downside. So let's make sure we do that. So just real simple, if we pay 100% cash, we have less risk. We have more cash flow, but less returns. If we finance it, the opposite is what is true. More risk, less cash flow, but greater returns. All right, so we've all seen teeter-totters, right? They've kind of gone out of style, seesaws, but I'll just play this a quick second as we talk about leverage. So essentially, a seesaw is major leverage. Okay, so when we're looking at a teeter-totter, right? How many of us have sat in a chair, right? That's all that gal was doing. She was just sitting in a wood chair, and all of a sudden, boom, she pops up out of the chair and falls flat on her face, right? That's never happened to me, just sitting in a chair. And yet she's sitting on a teeter-totter with a fulcrum, right? And up she goes, and she's got this major amount of lift that pops her right off the chair. And so if we think about leverage is an amazing thing. We've got a rock with a lever and a fulcrum in here somewhere. Great artist. But essentially, we've got all this force, or we have a little bit of force that pushes on the lever and is able to move a large amount of weight. That's what a lever does. But as we can see, a lever also has some negative repercussions if not used appropriately. It can knock our teeth out. Okay, so we have to understand where the danger zones are. Think about some other levers in our lives. Think about the wheel. The wheel is a major lever. Before the wheel, right, we were carrying around backpacks and lugging everything along. Wheel comes along, now we got wheel wells and wagons. And now we're driving around in automobiles at 80 miles an hour, right? We're in South Dakota. Yes, we drive 80. Sometimes 80, sometimes 85. So some of us were driving to work this morning at 85 miles an hour. Well, with a wheel, the risk is greater. Thousands of people die every year behind the wheel in motor vehicle accidents. But do any of us not get in our car in the morning to drive to work? No, we don't do it. We never think about it, even think about the risks. However, because we're driving at 85 and when we hit somebody, man, that's going to hurt. We're probably going to get killed. So what do? Well, we take out some risk protection, right? Seat belts, airbags. We've put in the hoods of our cars now, there's little creases so that when we have a head on, the hood bends up like this so it doesn't take our head off. All these things are ways that we can now use the lever of the wheel without getting killed. And sometimes it still gets us. So what I want to talk about just for a quick second is how do we offset the risk of using leverage? So I just want to talk about a few ways to do this. One of these things would be if we can find it. Now sometimes we can't find loans like this, but every time we can, let's put in that risk protection. Layer it in. So one is if we can find no personal guarantee loans. So these are called non-recourse loans. Essentially what this means is that if we fail to make the payments, the bank can take the property, but they're not going to come after everything else we own to make it right. They take the property and that's it. It stops. The other one is to just do one loan per property. And this is one of those things where some of you are familiar with Dave Ramsey, right? Nationally syndicated radio talk show host. Before he became Dave Ramsey, he had a real estate empire and went bankrupt doing it. And I was puzzled by that. It's like, what happened? I don't want to be that guy, so what can I learn from his mistakes? And now, if you listen to him, Dave Ramsey loves real estate. Right? Real estate's one of his pet projects. So he goes bankrupt in it, it ruins his life, essentially. He becomes Dave Ramsey, and now he has another real estate empire. Okay, what's going on here? Well, I don't know for sure, but what I've been able to kind of figure out is he somehow had all this stuff wrapped up together in one loan or one property as collateral for the next, for the next, for the next. So when the economy goes south, vacancy increases, property taxes go up, whatever, one property goes down and it kind of takes everything along with it. And so what this one loan per property means is if we carve off or section out bulkhead, essentially, if we think about a ship, right? If it hits an iceberg, that compartment might flood, but hopefully the entire ship's not going to go down, except for if you're the Titanic and you do a really bad job and it floods over. But never mind. The idea with bulkheads is you section off the ship so that you don't lose the entire ship. Same thing here. So think about this once. And I've actually talked to our banker about this. I said, okay, let's say I'm not going to default on you, but let's just say I did. What would happen? Well, he's like, yeah, we would take the property and then it would stop there, because at the end of the day, that property guarantees the loan. If you don't pay the loan, they're going to take the property and your down payment, and you're going to lose that property, and your credit's going to be hurt and all that jazz. But you mean you're not going to take the other 30 properties? No. Okay, because that loan sticks with that property. And so if you think about this, let's say I have 30 properties and the economy takes a nosedive and vacancy's up and rents are down, and the state increases property tax and I can't make these things pay. Well, what would happen if I just sacrifice, say, 10% of my portfolio? Say, listen, I'm not going to make any more payments on that, I'm not going to make any more tax payments on that. Not that I don't want to, I want to, but I can't. So I can either lose the whole thing or bulkhead it off, take the rent out of those, and make the payments on the other 90%. Keep those solvent. Different states have different laws, but in South Dakota, we have a 180-day grace period, a redemption period it's called, plus it takes, who knows how long to get to the courts. We could easily have that property for a full year before the court ever takes it away. And then you think about it, it's good for the bank too, because they get, instead of losing 30 properties, we lose 3. And they have a tenant in place when they get the property back. The water's on, the heat's on, there's no vagrants or vandals or anything else living in the property. It's a good thing for them too. So I'm not suggesting you do this, right? It's not like I'm saying drive down the road 100 miles an hour and I want to crash. I don't. But if I'm going to crash, I want an airbag, and I want a seatbelt, and I want a hood that bends, and I want a non-shattering glass window that's not going to come and poke my eyes out, right? So put all those risk protection pieces in place. Other thing we could do is long-term fixed rate loans. Some people are like, no, I want to pay that thing off in 10 or 15 years. Okay, I get that. But even if it costs more in terms of interest rate, why not get a 30-year loan? If you want to pay it off in 15, you still can. But get that 30, so when things go south, you don't have such a big payment. Because if you miss a payment, now you're in default, and now the bank's going to foreclose. So give yourself some more runway, more than you need, to make it work. Another way to do it, if people are uncomfortable, is put more money down, right? You can go from 0 down to 3% down to 20 to 25 to 50% down, right? In a certain sense, more money down is almost more risk, because the bank, you got 50% of the ownership, the bank can still foreclose on you, but your payments would be lower by having a bigger down payment. Also, large reserves. Don't spend all your money on the property, right? You got to keep something in reserve. You got to have some backup, so when the bad things happen, you're not tapped out. So a bunch of different ways. Doesn't mean don't do risky things. It means, how do you offset the risk? How do you put the backstops in place? These are all good things. When we want to be the authority in the industry, these are the things we can talk about with our clients. We don't have to hide them. We can show them where the problems are, where they're going to be burned. This is a little teaser. Combining financing with inflation can increase our returns by 3 to 5 times more. This blew my mind when I discovered it. We're going to talk about this, I believe, in 2 classes from now. But essentially, in property, in real estate, inflation is our friend. Inflate all you want, man. I come out ahead. So this is a lot of fun when we realize that inflation is our friend. It's a hedge against inflation. Really cool. Also, just a couple quick points. Interest tax is still deductible under the new tax reform laws of 2018. Of course, principal is not. So we're actually going to pay taxes on the principal even though we don't receive it. And also, the principal part is part of the return on investment. So we're going to count that in our returns. All right, we are going to get very soon into some case studies where I'm going to have you, and by extension your audience, look at how to calculate this themselves. Because I believe we learn best when we do our own work, rather than just listen to me talk or listen to you talk. However, before we get there, there's a couple other really cool things I want to teach you. ROI versus ROE. Return on investment versus return on equity. So the first year returns are called return on investment. That's where we're looking at the initial cash invested, we take our returns divided by our initial cash invested. However, as we go further into the future, we look at return on equity. And this is something that I learned a while ago, and it kind of blew my mind on how to think about this. A couple quick points, and I'll get into it. But return on equity decreases over time when a property is financed, but it remains relatively steady when it's a cash investment. And we're going to go into why that is. But before we do that, I want to talk about equity. I want to talk about capital. If you look back into, I think you wrote the book in when the United States was founded in 1976. I think is when the book was written. Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. He talks about a capital, and the only way that you can make money besides working and with your labor is you have to have a capital. He talks about, and what that is a chunk of money by which you then make money. Well, when we're investing in property, right, the first capital we have is that down payment. But if we finance the property, our capital grows into equity as we make additional principal payments. And so what we're looking at is saying, as our equity grows, are we doing the best thing possible with our equity, with our capital? And this is a shift in mindset. It's a shift in mindset to think about, listen, I am, as an investor, as a real estate investor, I am a capital investor. And my job as a capital investor is to use my capital to the highest and best use possible. It doesn't mean that I'm greedy. It might mean that I'm greedy, but that's not the point. The point is I want to put my capital to the highest and best use. And we're going to see in a minute how return on equity talks about, are we actually putting our capital to the best use possible? Also, when you think about it, putting it to the highest and best use is a good for society, because if we're just wasting it, if we have a central planning committee that says, hey, because it's expedient, let's go put the capital here because that's good for me, the politician, as opposed to saying, what's the best use? Where can I get the highest return on investment from the capital? Society will be the most benefited by it. That's the whole idea of capitalism, the highest and best use of all our assets and resources based upon market pressure. So how do we calculate ROI and ROE? Well, very simply, ROI is calculated by the annual return divided by cash invested. Return divided by investment, return on investment, return over investment. ROE, same thing, but now we're divided by equity. So the return on equity, return over equity, return divided by equity. Don't get caught up in the numbers here, but what we're looking at is, over time we talked about how your return on equity will actually decrease. And I'll demonstrate why this is in a second. So notice this is our same property that we had used previously. Our year one return on investment in this case, even though it says ROE, but this is all ROE. The first year was 17.7%, and our equity position was our down payment, $23,600. That was our down payment. That's the cash invested. So our first year return is 17.75%. Watch what happens as our equity position increases. And our equity is increasing because we're making payments to the bank, right? Part interest, part principal. But each year we're adding to what we own of the property, and we're decreasing what the bank owns until we get down to year 20. In this case, this is a 20-year finance, and we own 100% of the property. We have all the equity, and we're not looking at appreciation in this case. So just straight paying off the property. But watch, as our equity increases, watch what happens to our returns. 17%, 16, 14, 13, down to 10 in year 10. And then we start, from here we go from 9.5 all the way down to 7%. Our equity, as our equity increases, our returns decrease. I'm going to show you why that is. This will make sense as soon as you see it. What happens when the denominator of our calculation increases? When we go from 2, let's double it, to 4. Oops, that's not going to work. Of course, we have half here. Let's double our denominator, double our equity. Now it's 0.25% return, right? Or 25%. If we do it again, double our denominator, our equity increases. Of course, 1/8 is less than a quarter and less than a half. So as our denominator gets bigger, as that equity gets bigger over time, and if our returns stay the same, which they kind of do, they might fluctuate up and down a little bit depending on rent and expenses, but largely they're going to stay the same. But for sure, our equity is going to increase. If we make payments, and we are, our equity is increasing, our returns are decreasing. Okay. So why is this important? Well, a couple things. One, for ourselves, for our clients, as realtors, whatever. I'll walk you all through all those different steps. For myself, I'm looking at it and saying, okay, in year 10, I was getting about 18%, now I'm getting 10%. Do I want to do something with this property? Do I want to refinance it? Do I want to re-leverage it? Do I want to trade it? 1031 exchange it, right? Well, we have a section on 1031's exchange coming up, but essentially, can I sell this property, buy this property, and not have to pay any capital gains tax? A bigger property means more leverage, means I can push my return on equity up again. Do I perhaps want to sell the property and invest in the stock market? There might be times when I want to do that. Do I want to sell in this market in Sioux Falls and go buy in Denver? There may be times I want to do that, okay? But this is where we're looking and saying, okay, how effective is my capital? Is it working, right? As our capital gets old, maybe this is ageism, I don't know, but as our capital gets old, it gets wore out, it gets tired, and it has to be refreshed, and we got to do better things with it. The other thing is, for our clients, we think about our clients. What happens if we come into the room and we say, hey, listen, you know that Wealth Optimizer tool I was talking to you about, right? We helped you buy this property with the pro forma. Now we're looking at it every year to look at how you did in actuals and look at what you did in actuals, right? Year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to year 10. Here's what you're getting in year 10. And of course, it won't look this pretty. It'll be up and down and bumpy like real life. But could you get better? Oh, by the way, I've got a deal for you, right? We could sell this property, I got a buyer for that, and I got a property over here that's 3 times as expensive. Let's go buy that one. You've got no cash invested into it, no additional cash, right? You got $23,000, now you can take your 56 and go buy, take that times 5, right? And now you can buy 5 times 50,000 in property. And you've got a bigger property to manage. If you're a realtor, I'll talk to realtors about this when I'm doing CE classes. I'm like, listen guys, what happens if you come to your investors and have this kind of a conversation? Think about this once, right? The realtor can sell that first property and sell the second property. He can get 2 properties here, right? Think about the wealth that can be created for the realtor, but for the investor as well. In markets, how are markets made? Markets are made by trades that happen. And there's market makers, right? There's market makers even in the stock market that make all these trades happen. And that's what a realtor does, is he makes trades happen. I've heard somebody say that real estate deals aren't found, they're made. Okay, and this is what we're talking about, is finding opportunities to get people a better return while making money in the process. Okay, so let's get into the case studies. So this first one, and I'm going to go through this, I'm going to read it to you and then work this out on your own. We'll pause the video on each one, or I'm not going to ask you to pause the video, I'm going to keep rolling. You pause the video, work it out on yourself, because you're going to get more out of it if you do that, and then I'll walk you through the math, how we got there, and you can check your work and then go back and kind of figure out where you made your mistake. Much better, I'd rather people make mistakes here, right? That's where we learn, rather than in real life. The other thing I would mention before we get into this, one of the reasons why I'm spending time going back and doing foundational work, right? When you think about it, you're like, well, I just want to get another tool, right? The tool's where it's at. The tool's going to calculate all this stuff for me. Why do I have to learn how to do this longhand with a calculator? Well, I think the reason is, number one, is this stuff it's really heady. It's really like, wow, what can we do here? And we can calculate all these wonderful numbers and we can make this property look just beautiful and just wonderful. But it's BS if it's not real, right? And so it's not good enough just to throw some numbers on there and present that to a client, get him to buy the property, and then it turns south on him, and he's looking at you and saying, listen guys, what gives, right? I know it's my decision as an investor, but I thought you guys were the experts here. And instead of the experts, we look like idiots. And so I don't want to look like an idiot. I want to give people good, sound counsel, and you should too. And part of that is understanding what goes into the Wealth Optimizer calculator. Now, I know there's an argument that says, listen, I don't need to know how the car works in order to drive the car. Totally get it. However, it is important when I turn the wheel and it goes clunk clunk, then I think, my wheel might fall off. I should maybe pull aside of the road and investigate. And so same thing here. You should be able to notice, maybe you don't have to, that's not the point. We don't want you to calculate everything on every pro forma that you do. That's why the tool's there, to save work. But you should know how you should know how it is calculated and what goes into it, so that you can spot the problem and say, listen, that doesn't look right. Right? Something's not right with that calculation. Go back and investigate, and you'll find that. So here we go. So this first case study, we're essentially saying we have $500,000 in cash. If we pay cash for $500,000 property that has a $40,000 NOI, net operating income, what is your return on investment? Okay, so you can pause it and do that one quick a minute if you like, but I'm going to go on and read the next one, and then I'll help you walk through the math here shortly. We're going to take that same $500,000 in cash, okay, and we're going to look at it two different ways. This is the whole idea of cash versus leverage, cash versus a loan. $500,000 in cash. So now we're going to take that same $500,000 in cash, and we're going to use it for a 20% down payment and buy $2.5 million in property. And that's what you could do, right? You can buy 5 times the property at 25% down. And that property has a $200,000 net return, net operating income, which makes sense. Okay, this is just a imaginary problem, but you can see that 200,000 is 5 times the 40,000. So it's just 5 times the property, 5 times the net operating income. But we also have $125,000 of annual interest payment. So now, what is our return on investment? Okay, 2 problems here. Go ahead, shut the video off, calculate it yourself, do your best, and then I'll come back in a second and we will solve it together. All right, so hopefully you have done the work, and hopefully you're right, but if you're not, again, that's okay. Let's solve the problems on paper and prevent big costly mistakes in the field. So let's look at the solution for the first problem in case study 1. Essentially, we had $40,000 in cash, and this was pure cash. There's no principal involved in this one because we paid 100% cash. So the bank's not involved. So we ended up with $40,000 in cash, and we just divide that by the purchase price, which we paid cash for, so that's the cash invested. 40,000 divided by 100,000, if you run that, is going to be 8% return on investment. The second part of that problem, we borrowed money. We had the same $500,000 in cash, but we bought 5 times the property. And so we ended up with 5 times the net operating income. But we have to have interest payment. So we have to take the interest out so that we're left with our cash flow in our equity. And essentially, when we take that $200,000 minus the $125,000, we're left with $75,000 in cash and equity. Now, this is just another way of looking at this. We had a $2.5 million purchase price, and we put 20% down, which was our $500,000 cash, right? And so we ended up with, the final calculation is $75,000 cash and equity benefit divided by our cash invested, 500,000. So 75 divided by 500 equals 15% ROI, return on investment. And so you can see in this case, we ended up with twice as much return using the same amount of cash, but using it as a leveraged, as opposed to just 100% cash. All right, so let's move into case study number 2. In this particular one, we're using the same property for the next 3 case studies, and we're just going to make minor variations so we can kind of compare and contrast against them. So the question you have to figure out in this one is, what is your cash flow with the following items? And second of all, what is your principal reduction? So go ahead and figure that out, but essentially what we have is we have rent, and then we have basic expenses, and then we have the debt service split by interest and equity. So start, figure it out by yourself, and then I'll see you on the other side and we'll walk through it together. Okay, so here we are, the answers for case study number 2. So let's walk through it. So first of all, we need to figure out what our NOI is. So income less operating expenses equals the net operating income. We don't worry about the debt service at that point to figure out NOI. But then we have to take out the debt service to figure out what is left, the cash flow. So let's do that. We start with rent, $16,000. We got management, we could take that out. Then we have property taxes of $1,500, insurance of $900, maintenance of $1,300. And then, of course, we're going to take out our interest and equity payments, take all that out. At the end of the day, we're left with $4,600 of cash flow, right? This is the money that's going to go in our checkbook. This is the one that most investors, that's the only thing they look at. that when they're thinking about their rental property. But that's what we get to spend on our groceries. Now the second question was, what's our principal reduction in this example? Well, the principal reduction is essentially the same as whatever the equity is, right? Those are synonymous. And so we saw that was a giveaway answer, no figuring necessary. You just had to know that equity and principal reduction are synonyms. It's $3,100. Equity ends up being negative cash flow, but it's still a benefit to the owner. Okay, it's still part of that return on investment. All right, case study number 3. Same property, but now we want to calculate the ROI, the return on investment. In this case, we have all of the rents and expenses are the same. In this particular example, though, we're going to pay 100% in cash, and we also need to know that the property value is $130,000. Which, of course, if we paid cash, that means we paid $130,000, and that is also our investment amount. So again, pause the video and go ahead and figure this out, and I'll be with you in a moment. Okay, so hopefully you got this one. Pretty straightforward, but let's walk through it together. Again, we've got our rent of $16,000, subtract our management fees, our property tax, our insurance, and our maintenance, and we're left with a net operating income and the cash flow. In this case, they're both the same because we didn't have debt. And when you don't have debt, those two things are going to be the same. And that ended up being $10,700. So $16,000 in rent minus the expenses, $10,700. Now to figure out the return on investment, simple calculation, take our cash or NOI, it's the same thing in this case, and divide it by the cash invested. We know that we invested $130,000 for this property, $10,700 divided by $130,000, we end up with 8.2% return on investment. So 8.2% is the answer in this case. So here's the same case study, but with a twist. Okay, so this is part B of the case study. In this example, we actually have some financing. So in the last one, we paid 100% down, 100% cash. In this case, we're going to put 20% down. At the exact same example. Okay, everything's the same, except for we end up with an interest payment of $4,000 and an equity payment of $3,800. So those pieces are necessary for this example. So the question is, now that we borrowed money, we used leverage, used other people's money, what is the return on investment in this case? What's the ROI? So go ahead, pause the video, and calculate the ROI on this property. Okay, so hopefully you will have something similar to what I have. So let's walk through it. Here are our income amounts, $16,000, and our expenses. Coming down, and let's go ahead to figure out cash flow. We're going to reduce our income by the interest and equity. Our cash flow then becomes $2,900. Basic, just addition and subtraction. So cash flow is $2,900. The principal reduction in this case was, of course, the equity amount. That's just a giveaway number. So the principal reduction was $3,800. And you can find these things on the bank statement, right? You get your end of the year statement. It'll tell you exactly what you paid in principal, exactly what you paid in interest. But in this case, it was $3,800. Let's take our cash flow of $2,900 and add those two together, because those are our two benefits, principal and cash flow, okay, for figuring out our return. So our total return then is $6,700. Now, we have to figure out, how much did we pay in cash for this property? Well, we know it was $130,000 was the purchase price, and we put 20% down, so $130,000 times 0.2 or times 20%, however you prefer, give us a down payment of $26,000 in cash. That's our cash invested. Again, next is the last final step. We take the $6,700 in our total return, and then we divide it by 26,000. Cash invested, which gives us a 25.8% return on investment. So this is pretty amazing, right? If we paid 100% cash, 8% borrow some money, 20% down, and we get a 3 times greater return on investment when we use leverage, right? That's that lever that's moving large objects. Okay, this one's fun. Now we're going to talk about ROE, right? We talked about all these, we're looking at first year benefits, but now let's look at the same property, but let's push it out 10 years, okay? So a decade later, we got a few more gray hairs, a few more eviction or tenant stories under our belt, and now we want to look at our return on equity. How well is our capital performing? So here's what it looks like. In this case, we're going to go with the 20% down model, because remember, ROE is going to be pretty much the same thing. If we pay cash, it's going to be the same almost every single year, okay? It's when we borrow money that ROE becomes important, our return on equity becomes important. So in this case, we have 20% down payment for financing. The purchase price was exactly the same, but 10 years later, we've got some appreciation. Just some simple appreciation we got. It increased in value by $20,000 to $150,000. We also know that our loan balance is $70,000, so that's what's left to pay on the loan. So the difference, and this is just a hint, quick a minute, the difference between our property value, what we can sell it for, and the loan value is going to be our current equity position. So you're going to want to know that in a minute when you figure this out. However, we are seeing that our income and expenses have changed. So we went from $16,000 in rent to $18,000. Why? Well, inflation, things go up in price, but if the rents go up, so does the management, the property tax, and all the rest, everything else goes up over time due to inflation. So we've calculated that in. And then we have interest and equity. Now, you'll notice that if we go back and compare to the last problem, these are actually flipped. Previously, and you guys know this from when you buy your home, right? When you start on that 30-year mortgage, you're paying almost exclusively interest, and you got like 20 bucks in principal. And then over time, that reverses, and you end up paying all of it principal, and then the last payment before you pay off your loan, you pay 20 bucks in interest. And so that's what's happening here. The previous example, we were paying more in interest, less in equity, and now it's flipped because we're 10 years into the loan. We're about halfway through the loan here. The interest is less than the equity in this case. So just, you see that, it's kind of interesting how that happens. Okay, so I'm going to pause, or you pause, and we'll be back to check your answers. Okay, so here we are. Let's go through this in terms of cash flow, principal reduction, and all the rest. Let's start with our cash flow. Here's our income at $18,000. Here are all our expenses. Here is our loan payments, and we're left with, at the end of the day, $4,300 in cash flow. Again, our grocery money. What's our principal reduction? Well, $4,200, right? We told you that. That was a giveaway number. Let's add our principal reduction to our cash flow. $4,200 plus $4,300, we end up with $8,500 in benefit, or total return in this case. So now the next step is to figure out how much did we invest. Well, same thing, same property, right? $130,000 times the 20% down payment. We end up with the $26,000 cash invested. Same problem. But now let's take our $8,500 total return divided by the $26,000 cash invested, and we're left with a 32.7% return on investment. Oh, wait a minute. That's ROI. But we said we wanted to calculate ROE. But we just calculated ROI. So, okay, what do we have to do now? Well, this looks really good, right? I mean, we see 32%, we're like, wow, that was awesome. Okay, and this is where we can get tripped up. We just did it this way not 2 minutes ago, and now all of a sudden we changed it on you and said, let's calculate ROE, return on equity, not ROI. So what happens when we actually calculate ROE? And you're looking at me, maybe somebody got ahead and said, hey, great, I got it. I didn't get 32%. But let's look at what ROE actually would be. So we're going to take the same numbers, but our $150,000 property 10 years later, less the $70,000 loan payment, right? I gave you that little hint there a minute ago. We had $80,000 in equity. What can we sell the property for? Pay off the loan. We're left with $80,000. That's the capital. So our capital grew from $26,000 down payment to $80,000 10 years later. So now, let's take that total return from the 10-year return, divide it by our total equity in the property, and now we get a 10.6% return on equity. Well, that's kind of a letdown. That 32% looked really good, and now this 10% is like, ew, man, maybe this rental property stuff is kind of for the birds. I was kind of used to that 32%. Well, what did we talk about, right? We said that as our denominator, as the bottom number in our calculation, right, as this equity number, right, here's our line, as this bottom denominator increases, right, our value, our return is going to decrease. 1/8 is much less than 1/2. Well, why is that a bad thing? Well, maybe it isn't, right? I mean, I'd rather have 8 than 2. Right? I'd rather have $80,000 than $26,000. So it's not a bad thing. It's just what happens, right? This is what wealth growing looks like. Is you increase your wealth and your returns decrease, and then you have to do something about it. You can't just let it sit there. So trade it, upgrade it, refinance it, re-leverage it, do something better with it. But this is a very interesting conversation to have with ourselves as we look at our own rental property, to have with our clients as we build trust over years of managing their property and helping them to build wealth, to achieve their dreams, to get what they're after in life. Again, just a quick recap to see it side by side, the ROE being 10.6 compared to the ROI, which, you know, it's there to be calculated, but what does that do for us? It just makes me feel good, but it doesn't help me be responsible and do something with my capital. And there you have it. That pretty much takes us to the end of cash flow and principal reduction. We will be looking at depreciation next. I know taxes is like got to be the most boring thing in the world, and yet it is got to be one of the coolest, most exciting thing when you're in real estate, because real estate agents, realtors, property managers, property developers have some great tax advantages when it comes to real estate and can really use it to leverage our wealth. And so we'll see you in the next class. We'll talk about depreciation. Thank you.